Welcome to the Next Level Human podcast. As a human, you have a job to do. In fact, you have 4 jobs: to earn and manage money, to attain and maintain health and fitness, to build and sustain personal relationships, to find meaning and make a difference. None of these jobs are taught in school, and that is what this podcast is designed to do: to educate us all on living our most fulfilled lives through the mastery of these 4 jobs. I'm your host, Dr. Jade, Teta, and I believe we are here living this life for 3 reasons, and 3 reasons only: to learn, to teach, and to love. In this podcast, I will be learning, teaching, and loving right along with you. I'm grateful to have your company. Here's to our next level. Okay, breaking in real quick, it is time for one of our sponsors. This is AG1 from Athletic Greens. Now, I've said this multiple times. You all know this. I am not a huge fan of vegetables, and AG1 is my go-to greens drink that I use to get in my vegetables. And the thing about AG1 that I've come to love is it's not just a greens drink, but it actually acts as a multivitamin and a probiotic all at the same time. Not only that, it's got prebiotic fiber in it, and it has adaptogens in it for stress management. So it's basically 4 or 5 different supplements in one. So I use this as my greens drink. I use it as a multivitamin, and I use it to get good quality prebiotics, adaptogens, and probiotics in all at the same time. So you might say, well, Jade, how do you use this? Well, I take it almost every single morning, and sometimes I use it when I have one of those days. Perhaps you're a little bit like me, where I feel like I just have not gotten in enough healthy food. I'll oftentimes do 1 or 2 more of those drinks. So I do anywhere from 1 to 3 of these drinks on most days. One of the other things I do is I oftentimes add it in to my protein shakes. It has a very neutral flavor and changes the protein shake texture and flavor very minimally. So it's got a very neutral flavor. I use it in my protein shakes, and I use it by itself. Now, what else do you need to know about AG1 to see if it's something that you want to try? One of the things I love about this product, the National Sanitation Foundation. Maybe you know what this organization is, but it is an organization that basically will test your products for heavy metals, harmful substances, pesticide residues, things like this. Well, AG1 voluntarily sends off their product to the National Sanitation Foundation for testing. This is something that is very rarely done in this industry, and this is another reason why I've become a huge fan of Athletic Greens AG1 product. And this testing assures that you're going to have a quality, clean product. The other thing I love is that this is, I think, the 52nd or 53rd iteration of AG1. This product has been around a while, and Athletic Greens has made this product better and better with feedback, with testing. This is just a quality product that continues to get better and better. So I would really love if you tried out AG1, support Athletic Greens, and support Next Level Human. And make it easy, Athletic Greens is going to give you a free 1-year supply of immune-supporting vitamin D and a free travel pack with your first purchase. All you have to do is visit athleticgreens.com/nextlevel. Again, that's athleticgreens.com/nextlevel to take ownership over your health and pick up the ultimate daily nutritional insurance. Thanks so much, and let's get back to the show. All right, everybody, welcome to today's show. I've actually got my good friend, Justin Janoska. He's been on the show before, so you all have, listeners know about Justin. You also may know or may not know that Justin and I have taught many actually continuing education courses together. He actually taught in my thyroid certification. He taught in my female fat loss certification. me and him, actually now Justin, we go back a little bit, man. And today I'm having Justin on the show because if you know anything about Justin, if you've heard me talk about him before, um, to me, he is one of the foremost experts in this space in really understanding how trauma, mindset, and sort of the way that we have had trials, tribulations, and difficulties in our lives impact our physiology, especially as it pertains to immune function. And this is not something that many people really talk about. And certainly I've had these discussions with Justin many times, but I think this is going to be the first time we've had this discussion formally on this podcast. So Justin, welcome to the show, brother. And let's get started by, why don't you just educate people and get us started with your general overview, wherever you want to start, man, in terms of how this works. What exactly does our early childhood upbringing, trials, tribulations, difficulties, and even stress as adults, how is this impacting our immune system? Why do you think it's important? And why have you sort of made this your life's work up to this point?
Yeah, absolutely. And well, thank you for having me once again. It's been a while.
Yeah, it's been a while.
I'm really excited to be here and talk about this because it's such an important thing. And, for me, I've kind of progressed down this health journey and career journey in a way I wouldn't have imagined, because I started off in the autoimmune space, as you know, but then I saw trauma kind of surface a lot of times within my own clientele. And within my own personal experiences, that has a big role in why I focus so much on trauma now. And so I really try to weave and make the connection between chronic disease and illness, mental illness, even to trauma. And that's why I'm doing my doctorate in it, because it's such a big deal. And I think it's highly important and underappreciated. So really for me, I see it as one of these major insults that kind of gets swept under the radar, in the sense that a lot of people make the argument of, I didn't have trauma, I had a great childhood, and they're very defensive about it, or they're just kind of casual about it. And not to say that they're wrong, but there's something to be said, I think, in the sense that we don't have a great understanding or grip on what trauma actually is, like this scar, this biological scar that we carry, the psychic wound, as we call it too, that leaves this sort of indelible mark, and we carry it forward into our lives, and it manifests in a multitude of ways that we don't recognize. So we can touch on any sort of angle with that, right? With mental illness and behaviors and addiction and autoimmune disease. So for me, it's really on the physiological immune dysfunction aspect of what I see show up, but it definitely shows up in eating disorders and body dysmorphia and all these other things that we see in the fitness space. So it's really interesting, but I think that the most important thing I want to emphasize with the time we have here is the issue with regard to children and what they're not getting in adolescence or from their parents, and acts of omission, as we call it, where you're not getting your needs met, and there is a lack of safety and a sense of danger that's felt, even if the parent or the caregiver doesn't see it. And that's sort of the disconnect, and the issue I see is that people think their kids are fine, but really the child is having a different experience. And it doesn't mean that the parent is doing anything wrong or a bad parent. No one's ever saying that. It's just, we have to understand that everyone absorbs energy and thinks differently in the environment. And that's the thing that I think is a big light bulb for a lot of people once they recognize and see that it's not so much about what happened to you, it's about what didn't happen to you. And the big issue also is the lack of support and resources that are not available when there are episodes of trauma, right? So I don't want to go off on a tangent here, but I hope that starts something for you to talk on.
Yeah, and actually, let me make it tangible for people by giving them a little bit of my story as a child, so that I think it drives home what you're saying. If you're listening to what Justin's saying, he's not saying that all of these things show up as, the big capital T traumas like emotional or physical abuse or sexual abuse or these kind of things. My childhood trauma was a mother who was struggling with her own issues in her childhood, difficulty with her mother. She had a mother wound, and she was very volatile emotionally growing up. Now, she loved me. My dad loved me. So I had a safe place. I knew I was loved. But my mother happened to be emotionally volatile. What I mean by that is
one minute she would, throw Jello on the kitchen floor and we'd all roll around it and have the best time. And she had no problem with that mess. And would tell us she loved us all the time. Other moments she would freak out if one sock was on the floor. There would be moments where I'd find her sobbing in a room. There would be moments where she'd freak out and say things like, I don't want to be here. This is too hard for me, out loud. Now, as a little kid, I didn't know how to deal with that, right? And as children in our sort of upbringing, I'm an adult now. Logically, I can understand, oh, she was having a hard time. She was dealing with her own childhood traumas. But as a kid, that psychic wound, that lack of safety, that feeling of not being, having an emotional sort of stability from my mother had ramifications. Now, we're going to get into this, but for me, many of you know my story. It showed up as distrust of women. It showed up as also I would call a pathological need for female attention as a teenager. It ended up, in my opinion, had everything to do with the fact that I had an affair and, all of this kind of stuff, and had a lot to do with how things showed up for me. And here's the part that I want to talk to Justin about. So we can maybe even understand that. But I also am in someone who has autoimmune disease. I have Hashimoto's thyroiditis. I've dealt with immune issues. And there is a connection here that Justin speaks an awful lot about. And so in this particular case, this is not something we would necessarily say, well, Jade, some people might be like, what's the big deal? So you had a mom who was emotional, who isn't. And for many kids, they would go through that and have no issues at all. But for me, for whatever it was, it imprinted on me a particular way. And it definitely influenced my psychological, sociological life with people. And it may have impacted my health as well. And of course, people like Justin and I have tried to unpack this. And so why don't you walk us through, Justin, how that works, hearing my story? I think it kind of gives you a little bit of what you were saying, but also how it perhaps pertains to what goes on in the body physiologically. What actually, if this is the cause of some of my issues, what actually happens? What's the mechanism there?
Yeah. And, I forget that you have Hashimoto's half the time, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't have that or an autoimmune issue, but my mom has Hashimoto's. So I can, when I look back at my mom's story and what she went through and where she struggled and the issues with conventional medicine and alternative and all that stuff, I could really see clearly now kind of the issues and kind of what got her here. And that's always the first question I ask people is, how did you come to be this way, right? Your disease, your diagnosis, whatever you have tells you a story, not just about your body, but of yourself, if you really listen and you explore it. So there's a whole biology aspect of this we have to connect, and because no one gets this disease overnight, right? So where does it come from? Well, my argument, and there's research to support this, so it's not like there's one thing, but this is a big chunk of it. And my argument has been that this early dysregulation of the nervous system during critical periods of development is really the thing that I think ignites the fire. And that can look, obviously, not just as autoimmune disease, but mental illness. And that's definitely a big thing that coexists a lot of times. People have these comorbidities, right? So, but specifically, it's the parent-child attachment disruption that I think is one of the things that we're not recognizing or talking enough about, because we don't have a good grip on, again, what that looks like, or what is good parenting styles, and how do I know if my child is absorbing my energy and if I'm doing the right things, and how do I know I'm making sure they're safe? It's very, very complicated, right? But I think, to your point, you have your own internal experience, and with mirror neurons and all those things about that, we can empathetically absorb that energy and stuff, and some people can come out fine. My mom had a very stressful she was stressed basically since I was born. I'm amazed it came out the way it did, I say jokingly, but it's just because I think there's some resiliency aspect of it, and there's even research to support that. So we have certain resiliency factors that can allow us to endure the storm and move gracefully through life and not have any issues. And some people obviously have a different turn of events. But I think the physical or emotional neglect is really the big thing for me that I see a lot with clients the most. Even yesterday, I had a conversation with somebody who has breast cancer and melanoma, and it's the same thing. What I'm going to say here, what happened, right? Well, through the discussion, we learned that she had dealt with a lot of shame, not feeling good enough since a kid, Not to say that's the reason why she had cancer, but it's an aspect of it we have to consider, because there's a lot of emotional pain that usually people carry, and they've repressed it and they've learned to in order to survive, right? So we have this nervous system dysregulation, this biological embedding that kind of happens in infancy. And the real amazing thing, Jade, about this is that depending on when this happens, as far as what age, there's different outcomes. We see this even with like mental illness. Like some people have more dire situations or are more susceptible to certain neuropsychiatric illnesses depending on when trauma happened, at age 3 if you were sexually abused then, or versus age 7. And a lot of it has to do with neurodevelopment, right? And when things are being reconfigured and neurogenesis and all this stuff that's happening. And if the wrong thing happens at the wrong time, that can really create a lot of problems. But I think ultimately it's the hardwiring of the nervous system that happens early on that really sets us up for all these issues, the neuroendocrine abnormalities that start early in childhood, and dysregulation and cortisol and hormones and stress responses. And then really after that, it's just like another insult after another, because we have psychosocial stress, we have bullying in school, lack of friends maybe, or maybe there's racism or discrimination. Maybe you're struggling with a divorce, or watching your parents go through a divorce. Maybe you're moving around a lot, and then you go through romantic losses, and then your grandmother dies, and it's one thing after another. And you see people, I do, as adults, who have a whole history of things that happened. And that's why I'm saying it's not just one thing. But my argument is that it starts off early on, and because of the fact that if trauma happened later on as an adult, and we see this too, there's different outcomes. There are more dire situations happening for someone who experienced trauma at age 5 than someone who experiences trauma at age 40. And so that's why I think it's so hard to trace this stuff to these autoimmune issues and diagnoses to early life adversity, because it seems so far removed, and it doesn't matter. We think it's because I ate Chick-fil-A last week, or had some bad diet. It's not really that simple.
Yeah.
So I hope that's a long way of saying, of explaining what I think it is.
Going on, I'm sorry to break into the show, but I wanted to take a second to cover one of our sponsors and tell you all about Paleo Valley at paleovalley.com. These are the grass-fed sticks that I tell you all so much about, that all of my friends know I have on hand constantly. They are in my car. They are at my house. I keep them at my sister's home and my parents' house. I have these things everywhere because they are the simplest, most convenient whole foods protein supplement you can get. Almost like carrying around pure protein, low-carb protein in your pocket. These Paleo Valley beef sticks are the only 100% grass-fed and grass-finished beef sticks on the market. They use organic spices. They are naturally fermented instead of using nitrates and nitrites that can be a problem in some of these cured meats, and they simply taste fantastic. Check out the original or the jalapeno. Those are my favorites. Please make sure you go over to paleovalley.com and visit. When checking out, use the code NEXTLEVEL for a 15% discount. Remember, our sponsors keep the show going by you giving them your patronage and spending your money on these high quality products. You actually do a few things. 1, you're helping to support the podcast. And 2, you are helping your health. And 3, you are making sure that good quality companies like Paleo Valley can be out there doing their business, changing the world, making the earth better. One of the things you may not know about this is that grass-fed organic and grass-finished beef is doing something that is so utterly important for our environment, actually helping to repopulate the topsoil. A lot of people don't know this, but our topsoil is being extremely depleted, and raising animals, especially cattle, the correct way helps to get that topsoil back. This is one of the reasons why I love Paleo Valley. Not to mention it tastes fantastic, but they're one of these companies, like my other sponsors, Cured Nutrition and Organifi, that are doing the right things by the environment. I really appreciate everything they do, and I hope you will check them out. Thanks so much. paleovalley.com. Use the code NEXTLEVEL. And now back to the show.
Yeah, and let me just catch people up, and Justin, you correct me if you feel like I get any of this wrong. I love what you said, by the way, about the diet, because you and I have been here for quite some time now, where, of course, we're two people who have been heavily in the health and fitness industry, and slowly but surely, I have seen not that diet doesn't matter, but I think it is way over blown in terms of its impact on disease. I would argue, and we'll see, and this might become shocking to many of you listening to this. I would argue that the mental emotional issues are far more of the issue around health and fitness than is diet. And that's probably, and I'll say that again, I'm going to say it one more time because it's probably so shocking that the mental emotional issues that we deal with as humans and how we deal with that stress of that in our nervous system is, to me, looking like it is probably much more important than what we are eating on a daily basis. Now, I could be wrong about that, but I will stick by that. And I know it's shocking. Now, one thing I'll just to bring everyone up to speed, part of what Justin's talking about here is when we develop as children, we go through certain stages of development. I call it the base level development of the child, where it's basically like from the ages of 0 to 6 years old, we are essentially not fully conscious. In fact, we don't start really making memories in a coherent, way until after 4 years old as children. And anything that happens at that time, we're kind of just a bundle of sensations. We're a nervous system that's developing. Now, you can imagine having a trauma or a safety challenge or a safeness challenge in this 0 to 4 age range, and imagining these things getting stuck in the nervous system. And I know that's a simple way of talking about it, but it gets stuck in the nervous system in the way that we handle stuff. We first have to have safety and security. These are our base level needs. Then we have to have acceptance and belonging. These are our sort of culture level, teen level needs. And then we need to sort of be able to feel like we have autonomy and freedom and can, be self-deterministic in our ways of doing it. And this is the sort of adult sort of need. And what Justin is talking about here is these different stages of development. It's important to remember our brain doesn't stop developing, and I think it never stops. But really, it's developing really, really, fast, and up to about 25 years old. Then it becomes a more stable process that we're learning about. But the vagus nerve is involved here, and I'll just briefly walk them through this, Justin. And then let's get into the immune stuff. But we have sort of different drives. We have a threat drive, and that threat drive is this idea of like, is the world safe? And remember, safety and safe are two different things that we have to understand when we're talking about trauma. Safety means, the lion is not there, but it could show up again, right? Safe means there's no chance of the lion showing up. What we need to have as children to develop properly is we need enough safeness where we're not hypervigilant. There is no danger, and there's also no, chance of danger, that we're in a safe place most of the time. If we don't get that, this has neurological effects that make us be in threat mode. We've seen this in the research that essentially look at the hypothalamus, the pituitary, the adrenal axis, and the way the nervous system responds just to everyday events. Those people who've had these traumatic events, as Justin are talking about, those individuals have either an upregulation of stress or a downregulation. They don't get the Goldilocks zone. They're either too high in threat or too low in their ability to respond. This also then has, a push into fight, flight, or freeze sort of responses in the body, which then I suspect, and here's the question for you, Justin, I suspect that the physiology is complex, but when I read this research and delve into this research, to me, understanding metabolism, I go, that's where the trigger happens. As soon as you begin to move into fight, flight, or freeze mode, which you need enough of that to respond, but not too much of that to over respond, you're going to begin to have issues. And this is directly correlated to the immune system. So there's a terminology that Justin was using, neuroendocrine, right? The nervous system impacts the hormonal system, and then immune, neuroendocrine, immune. The nervous system impacts the hormone system, which impacts the immune system. And this is essentially what we're talking about. What I would like to know from you, Justin, is what do you see are the first immune, changes? How does this result in autoimmune condition? And did I describe that correctly, by the way?
Yeah.
Did I miss anything?
No, I think that's it. Exactly. Yeah. It's very interesting because you're right. Some people have a hyper response, and it's interesting when you look at cortisol patterns, saliva cortisol levels, and It's something I kind of routinely do now because I'm really interested to see kind of where they are. And there are many things that are influencing it, but even with research, we see it that people who have like PTSD or even just certain traumatic experiences, they have a very severe blunted cortisol response, and others have a very high that lasts all day, and it's high all the time. So neither are good, obviously, right? And yes, this of course has a direct impact on the immune system, and it just shifts the immune trafficking of certain immune cells, and it pretty much breeds. What's interesting is that it suppresses immunity, but in certain parts, certain arms of the immune system, right? So you see certain immune cells like macrophages, right, become resistant to cortisol, and then basically there's this cascade of inflammation that goes on, and that's kind of the thing I've been saying is that you have that hardwiring of the nervous system from early life experiences, and you can unlearn that, undo it, but it takes a lot of time. But the thing that throws people off, I think, the most is as our bucket's accumulating with all these insults and threats, is it's like a squirt of gasoline on the fire every time you freak out about traffic, or your job is making you feel this way, or your boss did that, or your spouse did this, right? And then our personality traits. I didn't even get into that, but that's also another hidden issue that is reinforcing the stress, because we think even though it feels normal to us, it's actually putting more fuel into the fire. Being busy, being a compulsive busyness, being super mom, super wife, overachieving, overworking, and being type A, and all these things you see all the time. And there's a little research on it that touches on it, but there's not a lot. There needs to be more to explore, I think, but I see it a lot. And that's, again, trauma response most of the time. So, it's more than one thing going on, of course, but I think the thing that throws people into the deep end is when there's that final thing, like the diet, the toxin, COVID, whatever, what have you, that is like the straw that broke the camel's back. And then that's when they get hit with these symptoms and fibromyalgia and autoimmune issues and PCOS. And my argument is that, yeah, it's not one thing, but you think it's that thing from last week, but really that's just the final drop of drop of water in the bucket. And now you have this full blown manifestation. I'm not sure if I deviated from your question, but
I think that's exactly what people need to know, and I'm glad we're discussing it in a way that is not so deep into the biochemistry. I just want to clarify one thing here, though. It sounds like, based on your research, that the immune changes push more towards autoimmunity. So there's certain immune and perhaps this isn't as cut and dry, because I think you and I know it's like we can't say for sure, oh, it always does that. Uh-huh. But it sounds like, and I've seen the same thing, that you oftentimes will see. And of course, you can't make a definitive statement about this because the people you see in clinic are, sort of they're the people that you see. It doesn't mean you see everyone. That's why we need research to bear this out. But it does look like what you found in your research is that there are certain immune cells that begin to propagate more than others, certain arms of the immune system that begin to become more active. And that arm is more autoimmune related. So instead of, let's say, for example, and you're really good at picking up foreign invaders, now you're getting really good at attacking yourself, or being hypervigilant in the immune system, and so hypervigilant in the immune system that you begin to attack yourself. And I'll say something that's incredibly controversial, and I don't believe this, by the way. I don't know, but I'm just going to say this just because it popped in my head. I wonder if a lot of people who are sort of threat response people, who've had a lot of threat and didn't have a lot of safety and safeness in their childhood, they always seem to me, when I'm talking to them, to be sort of critical of themselves and the world. So they're hyper vigilant within their own selves. They can beat themselves up a lot and be harsh on themselves. And they're also looking out into the world and being harsh. And this is an interesting, sort of thing that I think the woo-woo world might say, well, that makes sense, that then the immune system is also attacking because this person is attacking the world and attacking themselves. Yep. Now, I don't necessarily believe this. I just think it's an interesting correlation. It does have some interesting things to think about when we talk about, sort of the new age woo, and also brings me into this idea of placebo effect and belief. What do you believe about the world? Do you believe the world is generally safe, generally benevolent, generally kind? Or do you believe the world is generally out to get you, generally cruel, people are generally bad? And what impact does that have? And so I'm wondering about your thoughts on that and sort of what you see, and specifically what we can then begin to, because I want to give them take homes
Yeah.
in terms of what we can begin to do. But what do you think about that? And give us a little bit of background if you feel like it's important in terms of what goes on with this immune system division that happens.
Yeah, I've thought of these things myself, so I actually kind of agree with. You may not agree with it, but I kind of do. These interesting parallels, right? Where you didn't feel safe as a child, so your immune system doesn't feel safe, right? You see these sort of mirroring things. And one thing I actually said this morning is that and this is going to maybe strike a chord with some people, but we're trying to control everything in our environment to control our disease. And that's like controlling the diet and the exercise and the supplements and the gut health and doing cold plunges and doing this and the next biohacking thing. And we never really, and I see it because I have clients that come up to me after years of this and they're not to the finish line. So what's that about? It's not like you need to do another thing. Maybe you do, but it's not more of this. It's more about letting go of control. And that's sort of the paradox, is that when you let go of control, you have control of your immune system. And I see it all the time. It's actually the thing that really throws people off, because they're like, wait, you mean do nothing and be lazy? I'm like, no, be intentional with what you're doing. But do you think that perhaps a part of you has been trying to control everything in the world to feel safe in response to what happened to you? And as a result of that, it's breeding and reinforcing the immune dysfunction you're experiencing, causing you to have these symptoms you're trying to get rid of, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's interesting, right? It's like one of these things where if you have a continuous signal, right?
Yeah.
And, it's kind of like, all right, the light's on in the room, but I'm going to put on, I'm going to try to close my eyes. I'm going to try to use a sleep mask. Or I'm going to try to do anything I can do to black out this thing. But what I really need to do is go over there and shut off the light switch, right? And I think the light switch in this case is, sure, do the diet, do the exercise. Of course, that stuff matters. It also is impactful. But if your nervous system is switched on in a way that is driving certain hormone and immune responses from long-term sort of memories in the nervous system, then I'm not so sure taking ashwagandha or something like that that's going to, suppress, and it will to some degree help the hypothalamus pituitary respond a little better. But that's like, at best, turning the dimmer down on the light a little bit, not shutting that light off. And part of what we then need to begin to do is begin to relate to the world and ourselves differently. And this reminds me of a lot of the research I've been doing lately, which is on compassion-focused therapies and different ways of speaking to ourselves and seeing the world. And, to me, compassion is basically this thing. And I'll briefly give you all a review of this and see what Justin has to say about it. But in the therapeutic world, we oftentimes talk about multiple selves or integration of parts, and our selves are our emotional selves. So if we are a threat response person because we didn't have safe and safety in our childhood, and remember, this is a perception, right? Other people, it doesn't matter what other people think. It matters how your little child integrated this. All of a sudden, you are in a threat response, or you dominate that more in your vagus system, because the vagus system has a threat response, it has a striving response, and it has a compassion response. And that also has to do with, is the world dangerous? Do I have safety, or am I safe? We have to be in safe mode to have compassion mode. And compassion mode is what puts us into rest and recover mode. Now, imagine we're on all the time and never resting and recover, because we're in threat mode or in striving mode, which is what most people are doing. And we never get into compassion mode because we've never switched threat and striving off. And this is literally what happens in the nervous system. Now, we have multiple parts. When we are in threat and striving, we have anger primarily, anxiety, sadness, frustration, resistance, depression. So when those emotions are prevalent, they are driving this response in a sense. And what we need to do is realize these different emotional selves are different parts of ourselves, and we need to meet them with compassion, which is incredibly difficult. So imagine you have these different emotional sides of yourself that are in threat mode: frustration, resistance, depression, anxiety, anger, and you're acting from these emotional states constantly. You can't just go, hey, shut up, emotional states. You have to essentially go, what is another part of myself that I can build up, my compassionate self, that can meet these other emotional selves? And this is what happens in a lot of compassion focused therapy and a lot of the research. And what we're seeing is that when you cultivate this compassionate self that delivers a safe space for yourself, we can begin to offset some of these other emotional selves. And that also has direct biological responses. It's funny, I was just reading a research paper on compassionate focused therapy, training yourself to be self-compassionate, and it raised HRV biologically, just doing these compassion focused imagery techniques, these compassion focused meditation techniques. HRV rose. Well, HRV, as Justin knows and all of you know, HRV is a direct measure of sympathetic parasympathetic overdrive. So we can raise HRV, we're actually balancing out the nervous system and perhaps switching this threat response off, which then, to Justin's point, has direct relation into endocrine and immune function. And so to me, this is where we begin to perhaps focus our attention. What else can we do, Justin, that you've seen can begin to, and I'm wondering if you've seen any research in this space as well, and you want to add anything to that, but what else can people begin to do besides taking a supplement or jumping in a cold plunge or doing all these things that literally have to do with reprogramming this vagal response, getting us out of threat and striving mode and getting us into compassion and safe mode and rest and recovery mode?
Yeah, no, it's very true for sure. And what's interesting for me, as you were saying this, is that while we can certainly do compassion activities and practices, and I always encourage that stuff, half the battle is getting people to believe that they're deserving of compassion. And this is something I see actually a lot too. And that's maybe a more challenging feat than than actually doing it, for me at least.
Yeah.
So because and this is where the relationship, and this is different discussion, but the relationship is really key for this, at least for me. So they can buy into that idea that they're deserving of it, and coming from, like you said, this place of this part of ourself, which I would call self energy, and that's the self that is like the sun in the sky, right? That we all have, the compassion, the clarity, the connectedness, the calmness, and can see things clearly for what they are. That's always there, even though bad things have happened to us, right? It's just been overshadowed and by clouds, so we can't see the sun all the time. But what I like to, this metaphor is very helpful to convey, because they are reminded of that energy, that self energy that's still there, and that they can tap into that compassion and those resources to support themselves within a therapeutic relationship, because it's always been there. The sun doesn't go away. You don't have to do anything to create it, right? It's been there since day one. And how do you know that you have that? Because, well, you survived your trauma. You're still here, right? You're still alive, right? So you show examples, and people start to see the truth of that. Oh yeah, I do have some strength qualities and resiliency. The fact that I'm still alive here breathing is a miracle, right? So I think it's a great thing. Yeah. So I think compassion is great. I think imagery is great. I think body-based somatic work is the way to go. And that's kind of the thing I'm focusing on these days, because, CBT is great. DBT is fine. Talking your way through this is fine to, bring recognition and truth. We definitely want to validate what happened to you if that hasn't been an opportunity. But beyond that, you hear it time and time again. It's just, it's not really enough to break through and create these shifts in the biology where we can feel an energetic discharge. And that's why you got to get out the head into the body and take this sort of bottom up approach. And so I think, for me and my team, yoga is a great way to do this, but it has the thing with this is, just to keep it brief, is that there is no one way to do this. It's very much like hanging out in an open field and you're walking down this path and you're not sure where you're going, but you trust that you're going to reach the destination. But you're going to take a lot of detours. And that's sort of the thing with this sort of work, is that we can have an intention of doing something, but we got to be unattached to it, to an outcome. And if we get attached to that, that's where we get stuck. So I think compassion is great. I think imagery is great. Anything to help, calm down the nervous system and kind of microdose it into your day when you need it. Right. I think that's half the equation there, where we need to do that for ourselves when we're getting fired up or getting triggered, because you're not really reacting to what's in front of you, the person, you're reacting to the past, right? That's what's actually happening. So we should do that for sure. I think that's where these things come into play, but we have to make a daily routine and find rituals for ourselves that can help us rewire the brain and create those neuroplastic changes so that it learns a new language, right? You don't learn French overnight, so you got to continue to kind of recite and do these things. So I hope that makes sense. But
For the interruption, but I want to jump in real quick and tell you about one of my favorite new products. And to start out, I want to ask you a question. If you had to follow your friends around who are not the healthiest in the world and see what they are doing, what would be the number one thing you would probably tell them to do to start? For most people, that's going to be drinking more water, right? This is something that we talk about all the time in health and fitness. It's almost as if we think of it as an afterthought now because obviously water is so crucial. However, we oftentimes get this wrong. For example, did you know that when it comes to hydration, just drinking water can make things worse? Most people don't know this. Why? Partly because most people are over drinking water and under consuming the electrolytes that help water do its job. What we don't realize is that hydration is not just about water. It's about electrolytes, the minerals in there, as well as getting that water into the cells. And so you do not want to be over consuming water if you're not getting your electrolytes right. And this opens up a whole new discussion because most people are not getting their electrolytes right. For example, did you know that too low sodium is an issue? Just as much, if not more so, than high sodium. In other words, what we want if we're going to get the right electrolytes is to get the right amount of sodium and potassium and magnesium in the Goldilocks zone. We don't want too much. We don't want too little. We want it just right. This opens up a whole other thing here too, because people who are exercising, doing sauna therapies, doing low carb diets are disrupting and losing lots and lots of their electrolytes. For example, when insulin is not around in low carb diets, you will excrete lots of sodium. In other words, under that state, exercising, low carb diets, all these things, you actually need more sodium. And so if you're somebody who has been just drinking water, not paying attention to electrolytes, and also feeling fatigued, feeling like you're underperforming, not sleeping right, getting cramps, twitches, headaches, any of these things, then you are probably dealing with an electrolyte issue. This is where the product Element comes in. This product has been a game changer for me and many, many of my patients and clients. This is a rehydration electrolyte beverage, basically. It is a powder of electrolytes formulated with 1,000 milligrams of sodium, 200 milligrams of potassium, and 60 milligrams magnesium without the added sugar and other nonsense that comes in beverages like Gatorade. This stuff is basically a rehydration beverage on steroids. It is the thing that is going to replenish your electrolytes in the right ratios, decrease fatigue, really correct chronic dehydration. And by the way, many people are dehydrating themselves, becoming hyponatremic, low sodium, when they're consuming too much water. You need your electrolytes on board, especially if you are someone who is losing lots of sodium and other electrolytes through low carb diets and lots of exercise. This is where Element comes in. Element is a new sponsor to the Next Level Human podcast. I cannot recommend this product enough. I have been using this stuff for months now, and I have immediately seen changes in my energy levels. I feel like I'm operating on a whole other level, and I have seen this as being the primary thing that people who have been using Element have been telling me, that their fatigue is getting better, especially fatigue that comes after very intense workouts that involve lots of sweating and lots of intense output from the nervous system. Please check out Element. Use the code NEXTLEVEL. DrinkElement.com. That's DrinkLMNT.com. DrinkElement.com, and let's get back to the show.
That's what I have to say.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And let me add some things to that. If you're listening to what Justin's saying, I do want to talk a little bit about the somatic therapy here in a minute, which is, basically body-based therapies, movement-based therapies. But from my perspective, anything you can do to push yourself into that parasympathetic mode is perfect, right? So that's walking, that's relaxation, that's listening to relaxing music, that's all of these things. Then on top of that, hot baths, spa therapies, time with loved ones, etc. However, to get this to go deeper, in my opinion, what we need is we need a very intentional, mindfulness based look at what we feel and how we are interacting with the world. So, in other words, it's not just going out in nature and walking in the woods. It's actually going out in nature, walking in the woods, and cultivating an intentional emotional response of gratitude and beauty. And look at how amazing this is, and feeling the sun and trying to feel and get yourself in a place of love. And the more you do that, it's kind of like, to me, it's like the psychological equivalent of the multivitamin, right? It's basically, you have to have a little bit of this psychic multivitamin every single day, because you are operating from a place of threat and you're used to that. So you begin to take this multivitamin. That multivitamin is a sense of gratitude, intentional gratitude, a sense of love, a sense of I'm so lucky, a sense of just what Justin said. I can't believe it's a miracle that I'm even here, that I've survived these traumas. And you begin to cultivate that. And at first it feels like bullshit, frankly. And it probably sounds like bullshit, frankly, when you first hear it. However, in time, as you begin to combine this with walking and relaxation and naps and sleep and relaxing music, instead of listening to heavy metal and hardcore rap and watching violent TV shows and getting in arguments and gossip, you begin to cultivate this relaxing safety that is actually outward. You can see it, but more importantly, intentionally within your mind. And when you combine those two things together, things begin to move. And then you'll start finding yourself, in my opinion, what I've seen clinically is you actually have people who are like, the music that they used to listen to that just was soothing, they'll actually find themselves have an emotional reaction and a release to this. Or they'll be walking out in the woods and they'll have an emotional reaction and a release that begins to process a lot of the emotional stuckness that happens in the body. And to your point, Justin, with some of the somatic therapies, you oftentimes see this a lot. It just, to me, doesn't seem to happen until people begin to put these things together. Number one, a cultivation of relaxation and rest and recovery in terms of just our actions. Number two, a cultivation of the psychic multivitamin, where we are cultivating gratitude and love and compassion for the world and ourselves, and finding that stuff out there. And then also becoming very aware of the energetic holding patterns of some of these emotions in our bodies, and allowing these things to release, which is where things like psychedelics can come in, which is where things like EMDR can come in. There's different therapies that we can use to do this faster. I just don't think any of them seem to work well without this 1, 2, 3 approach, right? First, rest and recovery in terms of the action. Second, intentional emotional cultivation of gratitude and love and compassion. And third, then beginning to get into some of these therapies that can actually move things. What are your thoughts on that? And I know we're coming up on sort of time. Justin and I were talking about, we're going to try to make our podcast shorter. So I'm just going to get your final thoughts on this, man. What do you think? And any final thoughts to make people aware of this?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's in a nutshell, I think, how we have to look at it. I mean, self-regulation is key. And it's especially true if you look at it from the lens of a child who's injured and, is misbehaving. They can't learn something new until they feel calm, right? So that's the first thing we have to do for ourselves, is calm the nervous system and do those things. And then we can tap into self and do gratitude and compassion and these things, and explore that in a way that feels comfortable and doesn't feel inauthentic. And that's sort of half the battle, I think, I've seen. And if you can do it, great, but you got to acknowledge that resistance, or a part of you that has that resistance, and figure out what that's about. And I think the relationship with somebody is key to helping you sort through that. One thing I wanted to mention was, there are all these sort of therapies out there, and one of them being the solution focused therapy, as they call it. And there's nothing too novel about it that you haven't already said, but it's just the idea that we can emphasize someone's strengths and their resiliency and what is now possible, in contrast to what happened then. And we can recognize that we all have competencies, and we can apply this to the future. And I think what you do as far as Jade, as far as communicating this message of giving helping others and turning your pain into purpose and giving, as I say, giving what you want to others is a very powerful thing for us to do. Because I was even telling a client this yesterday about putting your energy into someone else and not making it about all your problems, because you're not the only one suffering. You're not the only one going through the same feelings and same challenges. You may have had different traumatic experiences as someone else, but at the end of the day, it's the same thing. It's called suffering. It just has a different texture, flavor, different smell to it, right? So I think there's so much to it, of course, and we don't have a lot of time, but the one thing I like to tell people is that there's more right with you than there is wrong. And that's the truth. It's just we lose sight of that because it's just so overwhelming to go through something so traumatic, and we carry it through into our lives. But really, it's just a grain of sand in the whole beach and the gazillions of other grains of sand, right? It's just one little grain of sand relative to everything else. And so when you change your perspective on this and you see this and you start to see where you are strong and competent and what you're doing currently and what you have done in the past, and you just kind of reflect on this, you realize that there's way more than what happened, and that you can use that. And then we get into the whole purpose discussion and meaning and finding direction from that. But I think there's a lot of moving parts. It's just, you got to combine all these things: mindfulness, compassion, self-regulation, finding solutions, and anything to help you come from that place of self, the sun and the sky. And the more you access that and embody that on a daily basis, which is a very slow turning of a cruise ship, right? Eventually you get there. And I think, you just got to experiment, because there's no one way to do it.
Yeah. So well said, brother. And I think it's so important that you're covering this. Let's me and you do another one soon on picking up on the purpose piece, because I know we both talk a lot about that. But tell everyone where they can find you, Justin, your website, where you are on Instagram and all that kind of stuff.
Sure. So my company is theautoimmunerevolution.com, and we do much more than just autoimmune disease, as you could probably tell. But I am on Instagram and on, what is the new app, Threads? I forgot what it is already. At Justin Janoska. It's at Justin Janoska, Janoska. And I post all this information on trauma, autoimmune disease, all this stuff all the time.
Justin is a great resource for you, everybody. And if you can't find him, just go to my Instagram page. Go to I follow him. We follow each other. We're very close friends. Make sure you follow him. autoimmunerevolution.com and at Justin Janoska on social media. And I appreciate you, brother. Hang on real quick. Let's just make sure we get this uploaded. And thanks so much, everybody. And see you at the next show.
You have been listening to the Next Level Human podcast with Dr. Jade Teta. If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure you subscribe and consider leaving a review. You make the biggest difference when you pass on your lessons and inspire others. That's why reviews like this are so powerful. Your words may be the only ones that resonate for someone else. Please remember, the information in this podcast is for educational purposes only. Always consult your personal physician or therapist before making any lifestyle changes. And finally, thank you for who you are in the world and the difference you make.